And that's the meme. That's the problem, you see. He can't win, you know. And then when that claim about Obama, quote unquote, can't win was being made by some of the Clintonians, as I call them, and I don't mean that derisively, I just mean that is the camp in which they are in. Just like there's the Bernie people, feel the burn people are in the Bernie camp. You can name them what you want. I'm not naming that derisively at all. The Bernie supporters are passionate. I think sometimes some of the Bernie folks can go overboard. I think sometimes some of the Hillary Clinton people can go overboard. Some of them. And they certainly did that in 2008 when some of them threatened and called James Clyburn the N-word. Jimmy Clyburn, of course, is the Congress member down in South Carolina who changed his support from Clinton to Obama back in 2008. And he got all kinds of hate mail. He got nasty calls from President Bill Clinton at the time. I'm telling you, he did. He talks about his book. Go read his book. Talks about it. He talks about it in interviews too. Go Google it. Look it up. I'm telling you. This is the same thing. He can't win. And then again in 2008, it was this there was this racial undertone to it. A very racist undertone to it as well, by the way. Some of the Hillary supporters were using the N-word. There's a famous video of a woman. Now, I don't know if she's a plant or not. Doesn't matter to me, quite frankly. You know, a white woman in New York, Upper East Side, wherever it was in New York City, in Manhattan, back then, who talked about, oh, Obama, how could he do this? How could you do this to Hillary Clinton? You're voting for an inadequate black male. Go look that up on YouTube if you don't believe me. It's out there. And she claimed that she was a Clinton supporter. Hillary was this and Hillary was that. Old white woman complaining about how dare this be true, Obama's this and that. Go look it up on YouTube if you don't believe me. It's there. Clip's there. I remember that clip well in 2008 when it was clear that Hillary was pretty much not anywhere. It was not going to do it because the delegates went to Obama. And I can't believe they would vote for an inadequate black male. Racist language, racist comments. And quite frankly, for being really blunt and honest, at the time, Hillary was not doing anything to abate that type of fervor. And she did it only when it was very clear she couldn't win and that she wasn't going to be the nominee. I mean, let's really be honest here, folks. You can just look at the commentaries and the special comments that Keith Olbermann made around that time. The very insensitive things that the Clinton campaign and its surrogates, and the campaign candidate herself were saying about Obama. Most unforgivably, the kind of things Hillary Clinton was saying to the Des Moines Register in a conference call, saying that, well, I'm in it to win it still, and you never know what could happen with Obama. That look what happened to Kennedy in 1968 in California. Come on now. She was saying, in not so many words, as you know, Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. And here it is 40 years later, 2008. And, Obama, I keep saying president because, of course, at that time he was still candidate Obama, Senator Obama. Robert Kennedy was a senator too, by the way, at the time he was assassinated. And so, the inference was, although she didn't explicitly say it, the inference was, well, you know what, Senator Obama, he could be assassinated too. It's possible. And, of course, he's black too, on top of that. So in this country where the history of violence against black people is sky high through the centuries, from enslavement right on down the line to this very present day with police and everything else in between. And with Flint, Michigan, the Flint genocide, as I call it, which is again violence against predominantly black folk by government. Hurricane Katrina. Now, Hurricane Katrina was a natural disaster, but it was preventable in terms of the way the infrastructure around that part of America worked. And I'm talking about government under the Republicans. It failed them. And there was a Democratic governor there too, Kathleen Blanco. I know, I haven't forgotten that. This stuff, again, this stuff is just crazy. And people forget 8 short years ago that Hillary Clinton had run a horrible campaign. Her campaign people were awful, gave her the worst advice, had her doing all kinds of things. She said all these kinds of comments that were so insensitive, often racist. Her husband certainly did, calling Obama a pie in the sky kind of guy. A guy, look, we all know what happened with Jesse Jackson's campaign in 84 and 88. He really doesn't have a shot. It's what Bill Clinton said in South Carolina. Go look it up. Don't believe me. Go and look it up. You can look that up. Go and look it up. He said that stuff. And a lot of black folk in South Carolina were pissed at so-called America's first black president. Toni Morrison, by the way, who is the great esteemed novelist, author, essayist, brilliant mind, Pulitzer Prize winner. She said that. She's the one who coined that phrase, America's first black president, being Bill Clinton. That's what she said. Black woman, Toni Morrison. Greatly respected. I love Toni Morrison. Excellent person. And that's what the so-called first black president said about then Senator Obama, comparing his campaign in 2008 to Jesse Jackson's ultimately failed campaigns in 88 and 84. Again, part of the progressive movement, by the way, people. There's a history, I keep coming back to this. There's a history of progressivism and progressive tendencies and progressive movements in this country that persist to this very day. The unions, progressive, giving workers the right to unionize and organize. Progressive, that's not incremental, that's progressive movements. That's progressivism. Shirley Chisholm, 1972, running for president, the first woman to run for president, the first African American to run for president, the first black person to run for president. Progressivism, pushing a progressive agenda for everybody, for all. 72. That was when McGovern, was it Humphrey? I always get mixed up between 68 and 72. I always flip around the two presidential candidates who were on the Democratic side, who obviously both lost in 68 and 72, because LBJ, remember, did not run again after his presidency, finishing the term that Kennedy would have probably been reelected to in 64, being sworn in 63, and then successfully winning a election in 64, re-election in 64. And basically, that's what happened. And then he decided not to run for a second term because of what happened with Vietnam and everything else, the disaster of the Gulf of Tonkin and then the Vietnam War. He shocked people, didn't seek a second term. He struggled to win primaries. And then I believe it was Hubert Humphrey in 68 that ran and became the Democratic nominee. He got beaten pretty soundly. Hubert Humphrey got beaten severely. McGovern, I believe, was 72. Came in 72. And during that time, you had a progressive named Shirley Chisholm, and was the standard bearer of the progressive movement. This is 72 now, okay? It's not that long ago. And There always have been movements in this country, even to this very day, that espouse progressivism. There's no secret to that. And so, again, when the Democratic Party changed its stripes predominantly in the 90s, in the 80s, but mostly the 90s, and became this more corporatist, more, and I hate the word centrist, so I'm not going to use it, more moving to the right type of party that is a completely corporatized wing, and that wing took over the party with the DLC, with the Clintons. DLC, Democratic Leadership Council, and the DCCC, which still exists. The DLC does not exist anymore. It's defunct. And these quote unquote neoliberals, who really were very conservative types of people, and people, when they hear the word conservative, they keep thinking, oh, right wing. But conservative in their approaches to things. And you have a lot of conservative Democrats in power, in government, in Congress, in the Senate, and also in everyday life, everyday people. And some of them are Clinton supporters. Fine, you can be, and that's not an indictment of you. But what I am indicting is this approach to this incremental change of building on Obama. Obama was a singular president. He did things that were very good in this country. I'm proud to have voted for him twice. But I think now we need a bolder step forward, a big, bold step forward. And my point is that progressivism rules the day, always has. That's always been in the marrow of the American citizen. Always. Don't buy what the media says, don't buy what politicians say. These kinds of politicians that kind of are middle of the roaders, preserving the status quo. Hillary will do some big things if she wins, if she gets there, and I'll support her. I will critique her just like I have Obama. That's not going to change, just like I have Bush. It's not about the party or the race or the gender of the people who are in power. It's about their policies and what they do. That is what it is for me. I can say that for myself. I can't speak for anybody else but me. But when I do this, I am doing it on principle and on critiquing the policy, not the person, not the race, not the gender, or the orientation for that matter. This is about policies that affect millions of people. That's what I'm critiquing and evaluating and responding to. And again, I just think that the Democratic Party, particularly the DNC as run, particularly in this case by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is doing the American public and Democrats in specific a great disservice with her hiding these debates. That is not progressivism. That is a status quo, middle of the road, conservative approach. It is. And these candidates want more debates. And I know that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the national chair for Hillary's 2008 campaign in Florida. I know that. She was. And don't tell me that she's not in the tank for Hillary. And it's clear that Bernie and the DNC don't get along. There's a very uncomfortable existence between them both. And I remember in the debate, the most recent one, a couple of Sundays ago now, NBC News, who was sponsoring the debate and who was holding the debate, did this backstage look at the candidates, and they were all being positioned in and choreographed to come in. And Bernie and Hillary and Martin O'Malley were all there backstage, and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, DNC chair, was standing off to the side. She was greeting all three of them. Two of them kind of shook her hand enthusiastically, and Bernie kind of shook her hand and basically didn't make eye contact with her. He can't. I don't think he can stand her. I could be wrong, but the body language was not good. And we know about the situation with the staffer Bernie had, who kind of came across Hillary Clinton's playbook or whatever it was. That was wrong. I think that guy should have been fired. He was, and I think anybody else should have been fired too, along with him. I can't believe it was just him alone. And that nonsense we don't need. That kind of nonsense is out. And Bernie got rid of him. And anybody else should have been. I think it's ridiculous, that kind of stuff. And so that's caused a little friction too. But make no mistake, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and all those around her in the conservative Dem Party, these blue dog Democrats, the Charles Schumers of the world, I think have done more to hurt the Democratic Party than have not. Now, Schumer's done some good things too, by the way, but he's a blue dog. And blue dog means a corporatist Democrat. Now, pretty much all these politicians are corporatists in a way, but they're not progressives. I'll tell you who a progressive Democrat was. Paul Wellstone, who regrettably is no longer with us. Senator Paul Wellstone in Minnesota. Progressive. True progressive. That's a progressive. That guy was the guy. And he's now no longer with us. An untimely death in a plane crash. Very sad. This was the guy, I think, who could have been the next RFK. Could have been. I say RFK because JFK, as quiet as it was kept, was not the progressive that he seemed to be in speeches. But his policies, they weren't so progressive. So, I mean, let's not pretend what the real deal was. You know, people had to lean on him, and his brother had to lean on him as well with the Civil Rights Act and that bill. Trust me. His brother was the one, as Attorney General, RFK, who was the one who I think had more respect from black folk back then. Remember, RFK was the one who went to Indiana on the night that Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, April 4th, to tell black folk what happened, what the deal was, and what happened. And, you know, he tried to comfort them. And obviously, emotions ran high. But he was there to do that. And I think the reason he was dispatched there was to try to really calm an understandably upset and angry and distressed population. And it worked, pretty much. And, you know, black folk were devastated. RFK had their respect. He was pushed as well, RFK. It wasn't all RFK, but he was pushed. And RFK responded to the push and was the guy that was much more proactive about civil rights and human rights for black folk and getting the civil rights bill passed than anybody else was. And then LBJ was in office and again was pushed again, and that happened. So my whole point here is that there are progressives, and we've had a progressive tradition in America from the very day that America as we know it today came into existence as the United States of America. From the abolitionist movement to the Reconstruction era to the suffrage movement, women's rights, and women's voting, exercising the franchise, to Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s, just before the suffrage movement, to FDR, progressive president as well, with Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare. I mean that was huge, consequential. Can't deny it. It was. JFK to a point, but mostly again the civil rights movement, the human rights movement, that movement, progressive movement. Rosa Parks, Dr. King, Amelia Boynton, progressivism, voting, the Voting Rights Act. That's the heart of America, and these corporate Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans are. You know, I mean, what has that got us? You know, incremental change. Okay, some change is better than none. Fine, thank you. I get it. But we can do more. If JFK could talk about putting a man on the moon and it got done, and at the time people said, oh no, it can't be done. You must be nuts. 10 years after he said that, it was done. So why not? Why not go with big, bold change? Why be afraid of a socialist when America's history, again, there's been lots of socialist things in this country. But again, Americans are easily spooked with labels and by labels, and with the media pounding away at socialist, avowed socialist every 2 minutes. People who don't do the thinking for themselves and allow the mainstream media to do it for them, yeah, they're going to get snowed under, and they're going to be fearful, and they're going to retreat, and they're going to not bother to try to do the homework. They're too spooked. They don't have the time to do it for whatever reason. And boom, that their mind is made up for them. They're manipulated. Good night. No one does the research or the reading. They don't have time to. But they had time to turn on the news, and if it's Fox, forget it. If it's MSNBC, good night. And if it's CNN, I mean, all three of them are awful. Fox, forget it. I don't even include them because they're just, we all know their game. CNN, awful. MSNBC, awful. You have to have alternative media. And you have to want to have a will to look at this stuff. There's lots of alternative sources. There's the Tom Hartman Show program. Lots of things. There's Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! There's the Financial Times, I think, that's good. The BBC is good. commondreams.org, a good site for alternative news. There's The Root that has some alternative news. There are lots of other places. Think Progress, alternet.org, all kinds of organizations and news gathering services. Crooks and Liars, I don't know if that site's still around or not, but there are all kinds of alternative sources for news. So again, I mean, really now just trying to get through the whole point here of going back again to Hillary Clinton. When Geraldine Ferraro, in her 2008 campaign as a surrogate for Hillary Clinton, said some really racist things about Jesse Jackson and about Obama, and actually repeated some of the things she said about Jesse Jackson in the 80s when he was running, and she was running with Mondale, and was named the vice presidential candidate with Mondale. By the way, they got shellacked, okay? In 1984, they got shellacked by Reagan and Bush. Landslide. Reagan won 49 of the 50 states. Mondale won only one. Minnesota, the only state he won. Okay, look that up. Landslide. Bye. Finished. Done. Okay, but Geraldine Ferraro, before she passed away, was one of the surrogates for Hillary Clinton in 2008, and said the most racist things about Obama. Oh, he's only doing this, he's only getting this kind of coverage by the media because he's black. Just nonsense. 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 The media doesn't treat Obama well. But she was being dishonest, and then had this kind of battle that a lot of white men, I think, or some white men love to see, the black man versus the white woman and vice versa. And, two quote-unquote minorities, or two parties who have been historically met with resistance and discrimination in this country, being bashed. White women didn't get their vote until 1920. Blacks and black men in particular got the vote. Black folk got the vote in Reconstruction. And then the Voting Rights Act was a preserver of that vote in 1965. So this whole kind of bashing of these two oppressed groups was exactly what I think some white men who had power wanted. They loved that. They loved it. And Geraldine Ferraro played into their hands for the Clinton campaign. And there were some really nasty things being done and said in that campaign. There is a great article, I believe it was in Vanity Fair in 2009 or 10, called Hillaryland at War, something like that. You can go look that up. Go Google that. It's a really thorough and exhaustive, in-depth look at how poorly the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2008 was run. It was run awful. It was run poorly. Terrible. Howard, I forget what his first name is. I think Howard Wolfson, terrible. There were others too, and I forget the other guy's name. Oh gosh, slips my tongue. Harold Ickes didn't do a great job. None of those folks did. It was awful. Had her here, there, and everywhere. Her image, everything. It was all messed up. Mostly male advisors, and mostly white male advisors who basically, I think, just screwed Hillary Clinton over, for lack of a better word, excuse me. It was just pitiful. And people forget the history of this stuff. I mean, and some of these people are on the margins of Hillary's campaign now. Or at least she's replaced these folks with people who are giving her bad advice now. I mean, having Chelsea Clinton out there attacking Senator Sanders on some lies that Chelsea Clinton was given about what he thinks about healthcare, and he's going to rip up your health. Not true. Go look up Hillary. Go look up Bernie's platform. But again, this is bigger than Bernie. This is about the progressive movement. And my whole argument over the last, God knows how long you've been listening to this, is that progressivism is the structure and the stricture on which the American populace and the American public at large has always supported, have always backed candidates who press the moment. Populism, whether it's Republican or Democratic populism, America's always embraced that. America has never embraced a mealy-mouthed, middle-of-the-road politician. I'll tell you an excellent example of this, Al Gore. Now, we can talk about the voter suppression because it was there. George W. Bush, with the help of his brother Jeb, who's running this year, and Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State of Florida, they stole the vote. They stole it. They stole hundreds of thousands of votes, purged off the voter rolls, mostly African American voters, mind you, again. Purged the rolls. You had this recount. The Supreme Court signed and sealed and delivered George W. Bush in an abominable Supreme Court decision. Abominable, just like Citizens United has been. Al Gore was a middle-of-the-road candidate. Al Gore was not a progressive. After 2 terms of Bill Clinton, where the country is moving in the right direction, 24.5 million jobs created under that administration over the 8 years. Country was looking good, optimistic, great. 2001 was on the offing. It was a new century, and Al Gore was going into that, but very weak, mealy-mouthed, conservative type approach. Distanced himself from Clinton, a mistake again. As I've told you, over the last 30 years, Democrats have gone this way, not embracing the person that they came in with enough. And not only that, really not just consolidating, but going for the gold. Hillary is embracing Obama now. Oh, she didn't, obviously, 8 years ago. But I say, and I contend, that she, if she wins, must go for the gold. She must do that now in the primary. Go for the gold. Don't go for silver. Don't go for bronze. And I'm telling you, the way she's running this campaign right now against Bernie is that she is asking people to vote for her, and she's going for the bronze medal. And I don't think that's good enough. Go for gold. Bernie's doing that right now. Millions of people want health care that's really going to do it for them. That's what he's going for. Millions of people are fed up of Wall Street banks getting bailed out. And guess who voted for the bailout? Yes, Hillary Clinton voted for a bailout. He voted for it. She was still a senator then. She was. She was a senator for 2 terms, almost 2 terms. I'm telling you, I voted for her in New York when I lived there. I voted for her. She was a senator, and she voted for that bailout. What happened? What happened to that? What was that about? How did that work? I'm almost certain she voted for it. And if I'm wrong, I stand corrected. But to the best of my memory, she voted for the bailout. Obama did too. But with Al Gore, when he ran in 2000, he was a mealy mouthed, uncharacteristically flat, dull candidate who lacked charisma. He lost. Say what you want about the votes, and I get it, he would have won. He did win in reality, but he put himself in a position where his candidacy was not one that really attracted Democratic voters to come out in large numbers. It didn't happen. And quite frankly, if you're really being honest, Al Gore and the people around him, his advisors, through their lack of enthusiasm, through their candidate's dry personality, put himself in a position to make that election as close as it was, even with the suppression of votes. Without the suppression of votes, he put himself in a position for that race to be close anyway, with or without the voter suppression, with or without the purging of votes. Al Gore was a poor Democratic candidate. Michael Dukakis, the same thing in 1984, or 88 rather, specifically 88, excuse me, against George Bush the First. Poor Democratic candidate. No passion, no excitement. This is what the Democratic, I told you, I said the last 25 to 30 years. I said 30, 35 years. I said that for a reason. Because that includes Dukakis. Poor candidate. Very poor. Very lukewarm. Bernard Shaw, another Bernie. Another Bernie. Basically sunk him. Bernard Shaw, the excellent journalist, formerly of CNN, he was really great. That's when CNN was really good. I asked him a question at the debate. You said you support, I think it was you're against the death penalty. Would you support the death penalty if your wife had been raped or murdered? Something like that was the question. And he basically, I don't know, I don't even remember his answer. Someone who's listening to this can go on YouTube and find it. But the bottom line is the net effect of his answer was he made the wrong answer. He gave the wrong answer. He sucked. And he just was sunk. He sunk himself, toasted himself with the answer. He basically said that he wouldn't support it or something. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But he sucked with his answer. And his answer got lots of heat. And that was the end of Dukakis. George Bush Sr. was in the White House for his one term. So there's been this tradition for years now of these mealy-mouthed, poor candidates on the Democratic side. There have been some exceptions now. Al Franken was an exception to that, and has done some good things. He's kind of a blue. He's an old-fashioned progressive. He occasionally does some things that I don't agree with, but for the most part, Al Franken has been excellent as a senator in Minnesota. Progressive, a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, out of the Wellstone tradition. Paul Wellstone, who, as I said, Minnesota senator who died in a plane crash, was really, I think, would have been the next best thing. He would have been the next RFK. He would have been that next guy who would have really given us truly progressive ideals and to run with. He would have run for president, and I think he would have won. Paul Wellstone. We'll never know now, unfortunately. Paul Wellstone, wow. That's the kind of politician that America doesn't have anymore. And I think the nearest thing to him is Bernie, by the way. A transformative figure. A truly transformative figure. A revolutionary figure. Obama is not a revolutionary figure. Yes, he's African American, yes, obviously. In that way, on that cosmetic but very deeply important basis, he's revolutionary there. But in terms of the policies that he brings forth, that he governed on, he's not. He's not. In a way, there are some things that are revolutionary in terms of marriage equality, Fair Pay Act, those kinds of things, women in the military, that kind of thing. But in other areas, no. Education, you know, I mean, I can go down the line, but I'm telling you now, this history of running mealy-mouthed candidates, not just in the presidential elections in the 80s and beyond, but in these smaller off-year races in the Senate and in the House, is hurting the party. Running presidential candidates that don't go for the gold but only go for the bronze or silver is hurting the party. I'm telling you now, the DNC has become more and more right-leaning. More and more right-leaning. They are. They've become that. Hiding debates in plain sight. Hiding debates, putting them on at 9 o'clock at night Eastern Time on Sunday nights. Putting them on Saturday nights at Christmas time, a week before Christmas, 6 days before Christmas. It's not good enough. And running candidates, with the exception of Obama, because Obama to me was more, what's the word? He is more a flash in the pan. Now, that's probably not the best word, but he's more the exception that proved the rule, because he was not a DNC kind of person in a way. I mean, he was establishment. He took money from Goldman Sachs too. They all do, right? Except Bernie. People tried to give him money. He refused it and said, no, I'm not taking it. So he's a genuine independent progressive and socialist, someone who believes that people should have a fairer shake and should be able to have the opportunities that they crave, that they should have. And people in this country are scared of that. When if you look back at FDR said exactly the same thing. And we in America do not study our history. We don't study history, period, here. Some of us do, but you know what I mean. Most of us don't. We don't know our history. This is recent history of FDR. Go look it up. I'm telling you. These are the same FDR who was elected over and over and over again. It's 4 terms. Come on now. The American public wants this. And if you give the American public clean water to drink, they're going to drink it. They're going to drink it. If you give the American public murky water, wishy-washy water, not quite clear water, they're not going to touch that kind of water. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam leader, years and years and decades ago, said something similar. Said something to Malcolm X like this when Malcolm X was part of the nation. He basically said the same thing. If you give people a choice between a clean glass of water and one that's murky or dirty, they're not going to drink. Well, actually, let me put it this way. This is what he said. If you give the American public, or the black man in the case of what Elijah Muhammad was saying, just the dirty water, and he's starving, and forgive me if I get this wrong, and he's starving, and he's thirsty, he's going to drink the dirty water because it's the only option that's out there for him or her. If you give the black man and woman that dirty water, that's all they're going to drink. That's the only thing out there. It's the only choice. It's akin to monopoly, right? It's akin to having only Best Buy, right? Being the only real retailer of electronic goods and all that. They're the only game in town, so they're going to go to them. They're going to take their prices high or low, and that's the only competition they have, it's themselves, right? But if you give them a choice between drinking dirty water and drinking the clean one, they'll take the clean water every time. Of course they will. Of course they will. But the problem now with the Democratic Party is that they're running murky, middle of the road, murky water candidates for president, with the exception of Obama. The Democratic machine is running these types of mealy-mouthed, establishment status quo type candidates for president as well. Case in point, John Kerry, 2004 as well. If you don't believe me, do the homework. I'm telling you, do the homework. You know, they did the same thing as John Kerry. John Kerry was never an attractive candidate. He never promised anything. John Kerry was a middle-of-the-road candidate. He fought in Vietnam. He hung his head on that. He and his campaign did nothing for a whole summer while these swift boat lying SOBs for truth, as they call themselves, lied like rugs about John Kerry and his record in Vietnam. And by the time John Kerry and his campaign woke up from their summer sleep, it was over. And even after winning the first debate so clinically and conclusively over Bush, it was over. He was toast. Toast. And yes, there was some vote theft in Ohio, I know. But still, even with that vote theft, that election should never have been what it was. Even with that, with or without it, 64 million people voted for Bush. And this was the guy who had Abu Ghraib on his record, who had an illegal invasion, illegal war on his record, that 9/11 happened under. I mean, who didn't do anything about trying to prevent it, or didn't act on the intelligence and the PDBs and all the other stuff with Bin Laden, didn't get Bin Laden. I mean, for goodness sakes, man. Come on, folks. It's there. And he still won. Because in wartime, people in America generally don't, or in any country, generally don't change the president that they have. But, Bush was awful. One of the worst presidents America's ever had. But he still beat these mealy-mouthed Democrats. Al Gore and John Kerry were middle-of-the-road, status quo, boring, dull, mealy-mouthed Democrats who didn't go for the gold. They didn't go for the gold. They went for the bronze. They went for the silver. That's what they did. That's what they did, okay? They did that. And even Democratic voters at the time expressed privately and publicly that they weren't the best candidates. They weren't. But the machinery under the DNC and the DLC and the DCCC ran these kinds of candidates. And these candidates were going to preserve everything. They were conservative in a way. They were conservadems. They preserved all these things and they corporatized and they were all down with that. Both of them were. And they both lost. They both lost. Obama was corporate too. He took money from Goldman Sachs. But he gave people, when he ran as a candidate, Obama, he gave people something. He galvanized people. His campaign was organized, superbly so. Both of them were, especially 2008. And the turnouts were enormous. It wasn't just about making history. It was about giving people something to vote for. Giving them something, coupled with the awful 8 years that the country was in. McCain didn't have a chance. It doesn't matter if, I don't even want to say the analogy. It doesn't matter who was running against McCain. McCain was never winning that election. Never. His party was cursed, and so was he, as a result of the Bush years. Republicans were running away from Bush in droves. 2 years left in his term. His 8 years. Year number 6. Year number 6. By the time the 6th year of his presidency rolled around, Republicans have basically deserted him. They're gone. They're gone. Bye. Gone. Bye-bye Bush. Not bye-bye Birdie. Bye-bye Bush. Done. Bye. That's what happened. So, again, when you have poor candidates or candidates who are just talking about, well, let's build on this, and they don't have a really independent agenda that really shoots for the stars, shoots for the gold, shoots for the moon, for the stars, reach for them. The late Casey Kasem, remember? Keep your feet on the ground, but keep reaching for the stars. And I don't think, quite frankly, that Hillary Clinton is doing that. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a Bernie guy. I'm just trying to draw a real distinction. I don't think she's saying the things and doing the things that enthusiasm for her campaign would warrant. I don't think so. I don't think she's doing it. And I think she's got to be better than this. Because if she wins and is the nominee, she's going to have to push a more progressive agenda and go for it. Go for gold. Be progressive. Be that person. I'm telling you, she will even win some Republican votes, believe it or not, I think. I'm telling you, if you go out there, lay it on the line, tell people really what you think and feel and what you want to do, you'll get somewhere. I mean, God forbid God forbid Trump gets in. But as the media has been giving him a pass, people are gravitating to him. And he's got no substance. He's saying things because he wants to say them, because he's got no agenda and he wants votes without saying what he's talking about. Now, no one's going to tell you exactly what they're going to do, but they're going to offer you what they stand for. What positions does Trump have? He's a simplistic simpleton who's dangerous, who's calculating, who's racist, who's misogynist. He's not offering you anything except those things. That's why the people who like him are racist. Or they like entertainment or both. But they know that Trump doesn't offer anything. You ask him, okay, what does he offer? Name me three or four things that what his positions are and what he offers and what he's going to do. They couldn't tell you. They couldn't tell you. They couldn't. With Hillary, she can tell you. With their supporters can tell you. Bernie supporters can tell you about Bernie. But again, Hillary will have to lay out a very distinct agenda. I don't think it's enough to go, well, these Republicans are crazy, therefore vote for me. I don't think it's enough to say, well, we've got to consolidate Obama's agenda. I don't think that's enough. You got to go big. You got to go bold. You got to go gold. You have to. You have to. I'm telling you. That's the way you're going to do it. Bring enthusiasm into your campaign. Passion. Bring it. Bring it. We want this. I'm telling you, I'm speaking about this now because Hillary Clinton has a chance to be the nominee for the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders does as well. It's going to be either Hillary or it's going to be Bernie. And I would be glad for either of them to be nominee. Now, right now, of course, I should say I would be glad for either of them to be president. That's what I'm saying. As far as who I want the nominee to be, I want it to be Bernie. And that is my support behind Bernie. Because he speaks to the kinds of things that I think America needs to be and needs to become. And the kinds of aspirations and goals and hopes and yearnings that people have wanted for decades. He is the embodiment of the progressive movement now. And every, cycle or so, that progressive movement comes around in a time that we need it most. We can't go with moderation and moderates. Moderates and conservatives and blue dogs do not get it done for the American worker, for the average American, for the middle class, for the working class. The blue dogs don't get it done. The conservative Dems are not the answer, in my opinion. It is someone who really speaks by, of, and for the people. And whose record shows it. Not just talking. A 50-year record that shows it. That demonstrates he's done this. And he has, Bernie has. As a mayor in Burlington, as someone who marched in the civil rights movement with Dr. King in the 60s, with CORE, Congress on Racial Equality, with somebody who was Burlington, Vermont mayor, as I said, with somebody who was in the House of Representatives for years, and then the Senate for years, still is. I mean, this is why I think Bernie is going to be better. And this nonsense from Dana Milbank about, oh, well, Bernie's going to get his clock cleaned. I think that's nonsense. It's an absolute nonsense. These Republicans are extreme. These folks are radicals. Guys are extreme right wingers. All of them are. Kasich, a disaster. Don't let this, oh, I'm so above the fray, Kasich demeanor fool you. Did a good ad on Donald Trump a few months ago, yeah. But his policies, if you really get to know his policies, and of course the mainstream media here is not telling you anything about any of these guys' agendas. None of them. You're not getting anything on the issues and any of this stuff. It's all about who said what, he said, she said, nonsense. And who's a citizen and who's not, and who's attending a debate and who isn't. That's the damn news now in America. That's how low the mainstream media has sunk, the corporate media. MSNBC, a lot of them, they've all sunk to that low. And it's disgraceful. Disgraceful. Alternative media, folks. But what I'm saying is that we cannot do this now with conservatives who are Republican light or who are hawks or who are going to only go just a little bit of the way forward. Not good enough. Not good enough for me. Not good enough for America, in my view. We'll see. We'll see what happens. We've got primaries coming up. We've got conventions coming up. We shall see. Thanks for listening.